He thought he was rescuing her. He didn't realize he was the one who needed saving. Graham Callister met Elise Navarro when he was 39 years old. By then, he had already built a quiet empire, nothing flashy, no headlines. He made his money flipping neglected apartment buildings in cities most people forgot existed. Detroit, Milwaukee, Cincinnati. Places with boarded-up windows, streets that hadn't seen investment in decades. Graham could walk through a crumbling hallway and know what it would be worth 2 years later. He had a talent for spotting value where others only saw decay. His fortune grew like ivy, slow, steady, then suddenly everywhere. One building turned into 10. 10 into 100. Within 7 years, he'd gone from driving a rusted-out Ford to cruising in a navy blue Range Rover with a $4,000 watch on his wrist, though he still couldn't pronounce the name on the face. He sat on advisory boards, got nods from men in cashmere, shook hands with bankers who never looked at his shoes. And yet, he was the kind of man who still cleaned his own boots before entering a room. He wasn't looking for anyone that night in Chicago. The benefit was for a pediatric cancer hospital, and he had only agreed to go because his accountant's wife was on the planning committee. Graham stood at the bar, sipping a watered-down bourbon, scanning the room full of silk and shallow smiles, when he saw her. Elise Navarro didn't dress like the others. No gown. No pearls. She wore a forest green blouse, buttons slightly undone, paired with high-waisted pants that made her look like she belonged in an old film reel. She had this energy, coiled, detached, like she was watching the party from another dimension. People tried to talk to her. She listened with that half-smile people confuse for politeness, but Graham could tell, she wasn't impressed. When her eyes met his, there was no flirtation. Just recognition. Like she already knew who he was, and how the story would end. She was 29. Restored paintings for a living. Lived in a converted loft in Bucktown with a one-eyed cat named Darwin and 3 flourishing houseplants she talked to. Her voice was low and smoky, like a jazz record played too slow. When she spoke, people leaned in. She didn't say much, but when she did, it landed. She said no the first time he asked her out. And the second. It wasn't until the third time, when he left a copy of her favorite poetry book at her door with a note that read, "For your stormy days," that she agreed to dinner. He fell. Hard. In 3 months, she moved into his penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. She brought incense and mismatched rugs, paintings that looked like broken dreams, and sculpted candles shaped like melting bodies. She changed the air, literally. The house stopped smelling like leather and pine. Now it smelled like jasmine, clove, and heat. "You lived like a rich monk," she teased one night, sitting cross-legged on his marble kitchen floor at 2 a.m., eating salted pistachios. "All that money and nothing alive in your life." He laughed. He let her in. Let her rearrange the furniture and parts of his life. She challenged his friends, questioned his reading choices, deleted half the music on his phone. She didn't believe in marriage. Thought children were a distraction. Said most rich men were emotionally bankrupt parasites. He listened, nodded, said she was probably right. Then she told him her dream. She wanted to start a nonprofit for underrepresented women in the arts, those who couldn't afford studio space or supplies or exposure. "It's not about charity," she said. "It's about giving girls a stage before the world tells them to sit down." So Graham did what he thought love was. He sold off 2 key properties, high-yield assets in a developing Cleveland corridor, and handed her a check for $4.2 million. "Your vision," he said, placing the envelope in her palm, "shouldn't wait for approval." She kissed him like he'd just saved her. That night, they made love with the windows open, the city below completely unaware that something had shifted forever. A month later, she started coming home late. At first, it was gallery visits, artist meetings, press calls. Then it was donor cocktails and overbooked panels. Her phone buzzed constantly. She laughed more, but rarely with him. When he asked about the new names lighting up her screen, she looked bored. "You're imagining things," she said, brushing her hair back. "I'm just busy." He believed her. Because love, once you've spent it, isn't easy to ask a refund for. The days grew heavier. Elise's presence became more unpredictable, her perfume lingered longer than she did. She was always somewhere else, at a studio opening, a donor brunch, or a retreat in northern Michigan. She texted more than she talked. When they did speak, she was distracted, like she was scanning a script only she could read. Still, Graham didn't press. He hosted a fundraiser at their place. A gallery-themed event, full of art students and bohemian benefactors. Elise floated through it in a silk robe that wasn't quite a dress, kissing cheeks and whispering promises of grants that didn't yet exist. She laughed loud and bright, touching arms, making men forget who they came with. Graham stood back, watching her like one might watch a fire, beautiful, warm, and dangerous. After the guests left, she disappeared into the bedroom without a word. He found her asleep in his shirt, makeup smeared. A single stiletto lay by the door, forgotten. He picked it up and placed it beside the other one. That night, he lay beside her, staring at the ceiling, counting cracks he never noticed before. 2 weeks later, he came home early. The meeting had been cancelled. Elise didn't hear the door. Her voice echoed from down the hallway, low and hushed. "No, I told you, he won't ask. He never does. Just a little longer, and it's clean." He stopped mid-step. The air turned still. She was in the office, her space. Graham rarely went in. She'd turned it into the headquarters for her nonprofit, filling it with abstract canvases and a whiteboard covered in arrows and mission statements. He opened the door slowly. She jumped. Her eyes flickered, shock, then irritation. "Graham. I was just on a call." "Who were you talking to?" "A donor," she said quickly. "For the San Francisco exhibit next quarter." "What donor calls during the day to talk about how I never ask questions?" She hesitated. Smiled thinly. "You're being paranoid." He didn't respond. Just turned and walked to the kitchen. He poured a glass of water and stood there, staring at the marble countertop he once chose with pride. The silence was like a weight pressing down on his ribs. The next morning, he made a call to a friend who worked in nonprofit compliance. He didn't say much, just asked for a look into the Navarro Foundation. Board members, filings, financials. Anything on record. The answer came 2 days later, by email, but the subject line alone said enough, not a registered entity. There was no nonprofit. No foundation. No board. No official paperwork. Just a sleek website and a few photo ops in borrowed studios. The bank account where the money went. Solely in her name. He sat in the living room, holding his phone, thumb hovering over her contact. The screen dimmed. He didn't call. Didn't text. Just sat, staring into the middle of his expensive, hollow apartment. That evening, Elise returned humming to herself. She kissed his cheek, poured herself a glass of red wine, and asked if he wanted to watch a documentary about stolen art. He said yes. Not because he wanted to. Because he needed more time to understand who exactly he'd fallen in love with. Graham didn't confront her. Not immediately. Something inside him had fractured, yes, but he wasn't the type to rage or shout. He watched. Waited. The man who had built wealth by studying cracks in old foundations now studied the one forming between them. She left early most mornings, returned late. Her eyes darted during conversations. Her laughter grew louder but landed nowhere. She took more calls in private. Claimed the gallery's expansion required her constant attention. Graham nodded, smiled, even offered to help, knowing full well she'd decline. What he couldn't ignore was the change in her touch. Once soft and absent-minded, now brittle and precise. Like an actor hitting her marks. One night, while she slept beside him, curled like a question mark, he searched her name online, not the curated version, the real one. And he found nothing. No college trail. No confirmed past residences. No mentions in grant databases or art councils. The next morning, he drove to Bucktown. Her old loft was still listed under her name, but the buzzer had been disconnected. No forwarding address. No trace. He returned home and opened the file he never thought he'd create, notes, dates, transfers, printouts of wire records. His eyes scanned each page like a man reviewing the architecture of his own downfall. By the end of the week, he knew. She hadn't just taken the money. She had rewritten herself with it. That Friday, she invited him to a private showing, a supposed collaboration between her foundation and an emerging Latin American painter. The venue was in an industrial warehouse. The crowd was younger, edgier, with camera-ready outfits and champagne in plastic cups. Elise moved through them like smoke. She called him darling for the first time in weeks, introduced him to people whose names he immediately forgot. The exhibit, while decent, was unremarkable. A few spray-painted canvases, an installation of shoes hanging from the ceiling. But she beamed as if she'd curated the Louvre. Afterward, in the car, Graham said nothing. She asked if he'd enjoyed it. He turned to her and simply said, "How long were you planning this?" Her expression didn't shift. Planning what? This. All of it. Was I the mark, or just the bankroll? She looked out the window, took a deep breath, then back at him with a calm he would remember for the rest of his life. "I didn't plan to stay, if that's what you mean," she said. "But for a while, it was nice pretending we were something." He stared at her. "So, none of it was real?" She didn't answer. But the silence spoke louder than any lie could. That night, she didn't come home. Graham stood in the penthouse, alone, the city below still moving, alive, uncaring. He walked to the study, now cold and stripped of purpose. Her sketches were still pinned to the corkboard, but he knew they meant nothing. Just decoration. Just a story she'd told. He went to the window and looked out at the lake, where the waves curled and collapsed, again and again. Predictable. Relentless. Honest, in a way people rarely were. And for the first time in a long time, he let himself feel the full weight of the betrayal. It didn't crush him. But it bent something in him permanently. In the weeks that followed, Graham moved through life with a silence that startled even him. He didn't call her. Didn't change the locks. Didn't issue threats or lawsuits. He let the silence stretch until it became a room he lived inside of. The truth was, he didn't want the money back. Not really. What he wanted was something no wire transfer could reverse: dignity. Meaning. The version of himself he'd briefly believed he could become with her by his side. He boxed up what was left: her scarves, a chipped ashtray from Istanbul, a half-finished bottle of perfume. Each object felt like a question he no longer had the energy to ask. He taped the box shut and left it in the building's concierge office with a single note on top: no return address necessary. Then, one morning in late March, he received a call about a derelict property in Bronzeville, a long-vacant church he'd considered flipping years ago but walked away from. It was back on the market. Cheap. Crumbling. But something tugged at him. He went alone to see it. The building sagged under the weight of time. Stained glass windows shattered. Pews cracked and dust-choked. But something about it felt right. Not profitable. Not promising. Just honest. As he stood near the pulpit, brushing cobwebs from the edge of a banister, he heard a voice behind him. "Don't tell me you're the developer. We don't need another high-rise for dentists and dog spas." He turned. The woman was in her early 50s, sharp-eyed, her graying curls tied back, a clipboard tucked under one arm. Clarissa Bennett. A local organizer, it turned out. She'd been fighting for months to keep the church from becoming another cold tower. "I'm just looking," Graham said. "Well, I hope you look and then walk away." He didn't. Instead, he sat in on her meetings. Listened. Asked real questions. Not about ROI or tax breaks, but about what the neighborhood wanted. Needed. When she laid out her dream, a space for youth art programs, music classes, mentoring workshops, he felt something shift inside him. Not hope. Not yet. But its outline. He offered to help. Clarissa raised an eyebrow. With what? A big donation and a ribbon cutting? No, he said. With time. With work. Skepticism remained, but so did he. In the following months, Graham learned how to drywall. How to argue with city inspectors. How to ask for help without offering a check first. He moved slowly, deliberately, rediscovering the feel of sawdust under his fingernails. The space began to breathe. Volunteers painted walls. Kids stopped by after school, curious. A jazz musician donated instruments. A retired contractor showed up every Saturday like clockwork. And Graham. He didn't mention his past. Not the Range Rover. Not the penthouse. Not the woman with a fake nonprofit and a vanishing act. He showed up every day with coffee and questions and a readiness to carry things. Clarissa noticed. You know, she said one afternoon while organizing paint cans, most people with your background disappear after one photo op. I'm not most people. She smiled. No. You're not. That night, he walked home, just 7 blocks from the church now, and felt something stir. Not triumph. Not forgiveness. But a quiet clarity. He wasn't saving anyone. He was finally building something that could not be stolen. By fall, the community center was no longer just a dream scribbled on a clipboard. It had walls now, bright, unevenly painted by local teenagers, each mural louder than the last. A garden took root where the old parking lot had been, run by a widow named Maylene who believed every child should know what basil smells like. The space buzzed with life, kids strumming borrowed guitars, single mothers learning to code in the evenings, grandmothers teaching textile art in the basement. There were arguments, of course. Delays. Permits that took forever. But it was real. Imperfect, chaotic, alive. And Graham. He was there every morning before the doors opened, fixing hinges, hauling supplies, learning names. No one called him Mr. Callister. He was just Graham. The guy with the busted knuckles and the best homemade chili on volunteer days. He didn't talk about Elise. Not with Clarissa, not with the kids. But sometimes, late at night, alone in the old choir room turned office, he'd think of her. Wonder if she ever looked back. If she felt even a flicker of guilt, or just chalked it up as a successful extraction. Then, in early November, a large envelope arrived at the center. No return address. Just his name on the front. He opened it in silence. Inside was a check. $4.2 million. His breath caught. It was the exact amount she had taken. The account number on the check matched the one she'd drained. The signature was unmistakable, her name, written in the same elegant, slanted script she once used to sign love notes. And there was a second page. A note. I watched you from a distance. I thought I'd taken everything. I was wrong. You turned it into something I never could. This is yours. It always was. Use it for them. There was no apology. No plea for redemption. Just acknowledgement. Clarissa found him an hour later, sitting in the empty music room, the check untouched beside him. Trouble, she asked, nodding toward it. He shook his head slowly. Not trouble. Just, full circle. She sat beside him. You okay? I don't know, he said honestly. I think I might be. They used the money slowly, carefully. To expand the center. Hire full-time staff. Buy more instruments. Build a media lab. Not a cent went to Graham. He made sure of that. One night, a girl named Nia, barely 15, but with a voice like old vinyl, stood on the makeshift stage and sang a jazz rendition of a protest poem. The room fell silent, then erupted in applause. Clarissa leaned over to Graham. This is what you were building the whole time. You just didn't know it. He smiled, and for the first time in what felt like years, it reached his eyes. Winter came fast that year, with snow piling against the stained glass windows of the community center. The furnace groaned, but held. Graham wore layers and learned to patch leaks like a pro. He'd traded tailored coats for flannel, boardrooms for boiler rooms. And yet, something inside him was growing stronger. Not in spite of the cold, but because of it. On the first day of January, they held an open mic night. A young boy performed a monologue about surviving foster care. A single mother read a poem about her divorce. An elderly man played blues on a guitar with only 5 strings. The whole room cried, then laughed, then cried again. Graham watched it unfold, hands in his pockets, heart thudding with something that felt like peace. Afterward, Clarissa handed him a folded flyer. You should see this, she said. It was for a symposium on urban healing projects. Small organizations from all over the country were gathering to share models, challenges, and stories. She'd submitted their center's story, and it had been accepted. "I don't like stages," Graham said. She raised an eyebrow. "Then stand in the back." "But your name's on the program." He went. And listened. To stories of reclaimed alleys turned into playgrounds, of addicts turned mentors, of teachers who built schools from abandoned motels. It was the first time in a long while he felt part of something bigger than himself. After his panel, a man approached him. Late 30s, stylish, confident. "You're Graham Callister, right?" Graham nodded. "I knew Elise," the man said quietly. "Years ago. Before she did what she did to you." Graham's stomach knotted, but he stood his ground. "She was brilliant," the man said. "Dangerous, but brilliant. I never knew if she really believed anything she said, or just knew how to make the rest of us believe." Graham looked at him. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I saw what you built. And I think, maybe, in some messed up way, she always knew you would. That's why she picked you." He didn't sleep that night. He walked the city streets instead, thinking about manipulation, about intuition, about destiny, if such a thing existed. He stood outside his old penthouse building for a long while, then turned and walked away. He didn't miss it. Not the view, not the stillness, not the silence. Back at the center, the security lights flickered as he entered. The halls echoed faintly with laughter from earlier. He wandered past the mural wall, past the old sanctuary now filled with canvas and color. And there, in the corner, on a table he hadn't noticed before, was a small package. No name. Inside was a notebook. Hand-stitched leather. The same kind Elise used to carry. He flipped it open. The first page was blank. The second, too. But on the third. "You weren't a mark. You were my only real thing. I just didn't know how to be real back." His hands trembled. He closed the notebook, pressed it to his chest, and sat in the dark until morning. Graham never told anyone about the notebook. Not Clarissa, not the board, not the kids at the center. It remained tucked away in the back drawer of his desk, behind old schematics and receipts. Sometimes he'd open it, flip past that single message, half hoping to find a new page. But there was never anything more. Still, it was enough. That spring, the center launched its first artist-in-residence program. A sculptor from Detroit. A woman who had once been homeless, who now taught children how to carve meaning from stone. Graham stood in the back of her first workshop, watching the kids' eyes widen as they shaped something raw into something that mattered. He understood that feeling now. The patience of creation. The grace of starting again. Clarissa had begun to call him partner. At first as a joke, but then not. Theirs wasn't romantic, not in the way most people understood it, but it was intimate in its own right. They leaned on each other. Argued, forgave, grew. He trusted her in a way he never thought he could trust anyone again. One afternoon, a girl named Amira, barely 10, ran up to Graham and tugged his sleeve. "Mr. G," she said, holding out a drawing. "It's you." The picture was crude, but unmistakable, a man in flannel, surrounded by tiny, smiling stick figures. He smiled, crouched to her level. "Why am I in the middle?" "'Cause you started it all," she said matter-of-factly. "You made it happen." He looked at the drawing again. And for the first time, he believed her. Not because of the buildings he bought. Or the money he lost. Or even the betrayal that reshaped him. But because he stayed. Because he built something that could last even after he was gone. Years later, the community center would bear his name, not because he asked for it, but because the neighborhood demanded it. Kids he once mentored would go on to start programs of their own, citing Mr. Callister as their reason. He never remarried. Never sought love in the same way. But he was never alone again either. And on quiet nights, when the air outside hummed like it did that first evening with Elise, he would walk the halls of the center, past the murals, past the garden, past the music room where the old church organ still wheezed out its song, and feel something deep in his bones. Not regret. Not vengeance. But gratitude. Because sometimes, the things that break you cleanly, are the ones that leave you open enough to finally be filled. And sometimes, being betrayed isn't the end of your story. It's where the real one begins.